Audiobook presents an unabridged recording of Hunting Eichmann, how a band of survivors and a young spy agency chased down the world's most notorious Nazi, by Neal Bascomb, narrated by Paul Hecht and directed by Stephen Mosbleck. This book is copyrighted 2009 by Neal Bascomb. This recording is copyrighted 2009 by Recorded Books. The author opens this book with the following two epigraphs. The first is a 1924 quote from Lord Chief Justice Gordon Hewitt. "Justice should not only be done, but should manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done." The second quote that begins this book is from For Adolf Eichmann, lines written in 1960 by Primo Levi. "And you have come, our precious enemy, forsaken creature, man ringed by death. What can you say now, before our assembly? And now, Hunting Eichmann."
Prologue. The man from Bus 203 was late. For 3 weeks now, the team tracking him had watched their target return from work to his small brick bunker of a house on Garibaldi Street. Every night was the same. At 7:40 p.m., Bus 203 stopped at the kiosk on the narrow highway 110 yards from the corner of Garibaldi Street. The man exited the bus. Another passenger, a woman, also exited at the same stop. They separated. Sometimes the man stopped at the kiosk for a pack of cigarettes, but this never took more than a minute. Then he crossed the street and walked toward his house. If a car approached, he turned on his flashlight, one end red, the other white, to signal his presence. When he reached his property, he circled the house once before entering, as if checking that all was secure. Inside, he greeted his wife and young son, lit a few additional kerosene lamps, and then sat down for dinner. He was a man of precise routines and schedules. His predictability made him vulnerable. But on this night, Wednesday, May the 11th, 1960, 7:40 passed, and neither Bus 203 nor the man was in sight. The team waited in two cars. One black Chevrolet sedan was parked on the edge of Route 202, facing toward the bus stop. Once the man showed, if he showed, the driver in the backup car would flick on his headlights to blind him before he turned left toward his house. The capture car, a black Buick limousine, was stationed on Garibaldi Street between the highway and the man's home. The driver, in a chauffeur's uniform, had popped the hood to give the impression that the limousine had broken down. Two other men stood outside the car in the cold, windy night, pretending to fiddle with the engine. These two were the strong men, tasked with grabbing the target and getting him into the car as quietly and quickly as possible. At 7:44, a bus finally approached on Route 202, but it drove straight past the kiosk. The team could only wait so long in this isolated neighborhood on the northern outskirts of Buenos Aires, Argentina, without attracting too much attention. There was only a scattering of houses on the flat, nearly treeless plain. Cars, foreign to the neighborhood, stood out. The team leader, hidden in the limousine's back seat, insisted that they stay despite the risks. There was no argument from the team. Not now. Not at this critical hour. The man must not be allowed to elude capture. Exactly 15 years previously, in the last days of the Third Reich, SS Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Eichmann, chief of Department IVB4 of the Reich Security Main Office and the operational manager of the Nazi genocide, had escaped into the Austrian Alps. He had been listed as killed in action by the woman who now impatiently waited for her husband's return from work. He had been sought by Allied investigators and independent Nazi hunters such as Simon Wiesenthal. He had reportedly been executed by Jewish avengers. He had been rumored to be living in West Germany, England, Kuwait, the United States, and even Israel. His trail had gone from hot to cold to hot again. He had been so successful at hiding his identity that the Mossad agents now in position on Garibaldi Street were still not 100% certain that the man they had come to capture was actually Eichmann. A contingency plan, one of many, was in place if it turned out not to be him. Nonetheless, they were sufficiently convinced to stage a dangerous operation on foreign soil involving more than 10 agents, including the head of the Israeli Secret Service himself. They had read Eichmann's file and been thoroughly briefed on his role in the mass murder of Jews. They were professionals, but it was impossible for them to be impartial about this mission. Since arriving in Argentina, one agent kept seeing the faces of the members of his family who had been killed in the Holocaust. They could wait a few more minutes for bus 203. At 8:05, the team saw another faint halo of light in the distance. Moments later, the bus's headlights shone brightly down the highway, piercing the darkness. Brakes screeched, the bus door clattered open, and the two passengers stepped down onto the street. As the bus pulled away, the woman turned off to the left, moving away from the man. The man, headed for Garibaldi Street, bent forward in the wind. His hands were stuffed into his coat. Thunder cracked in the distance, warning of a storm. It was time for Adolf Eichmann to answer for what he had done. Chapter 1. Outside Mauthausen, a concentration camp built beside a granite quarry on the northern edge of the Danube River in Upper Austria, Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann stood at the head of a long column of 140 command cars and trucks. It was noon on Sunday, March the 19th, 1944, and he was 38 years old to the day. Dressed in his pale gray SS uniform, he looked to be a man with the sympathies and humor of a piece of granite. He had fine, dark blonde hair, narrow lips, a long nose, and grayish-blue eyes. His skull turned sharply inward at his temples, a feature only accentuated by the peaked cap now drawn over his head. Of medium height, he held his trim frame slightly forward, as if he was a tracker on a fresh trail. As he watched his men prepare to move out, the left corner of his mouth twitched unconsciously, drawing his face into a temporary scowl. The convoy, carrying more than 500 members of the SS, was ready. Down the line of vehicles, engines rumbled to life, and black exhaust spewed out across the road. Eichmann climbed into his Mercedes staff car and signaled for the motorcycle troops leading the column to advance toward Budapest, following the trail blazed by the 1st Panzer Division. 12 hours before, 11 Wehrmacht divisions had stormed across the Hungarian border, while paratroopers had dropped into the historic capital city to seize strategic government buildings and positions. Adolf Hitler had ordered the occupation of the country to prevent the Axis partner from pursuing an armistice with the Allies now that the Red Army was advancing from the east. As the column of vehicles sped away from Mauthausen, Eichmann expected that in a few months this camp and its satellites would be filled with more Jewish slave laborers to work in the quarries and surrounding munitions, steel, and airplane factories. "Send down the master in person," Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler had ordered, referring to Eichmann in his instructions to comb Hungary from east to west of its Jews. Those who were physically fit were to be delivered to labor camps for destruction through work. Those who were not were to be exterminated immediately. Eichmann's mission was a secondary but critical one in the invasion of Hungary. He inflated with pride at the confidence Himmler had shown in him by charging him to oversee the operation personally. Eichmann would stop at nothing to live up to his new moniker, the Master. He gathered all of his senior, most effective officers from across Europe to aid in his efforts. With the
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.